What gets you into legal trouble usually entails some fun. You know, homosexuality in Victorian England, bootlegging alcohol during the Prohibition era in the States, or like using more than a 5-second clip of a Warner Brothers movie on YouTube. But what if I told you that something as innocent as writing fanfiction and sharing it with other fans online can get you slapped with a cease and desist from your favorite author? This is a story about Anne Rice's war on fanfiction, about the myths and misconceptions that surround it, and about the enduring legacy of what would come to be known as the SpecWriter Massacre of the year 2000. So join me for this crazy ride while I sip very questionable quality alcohol-free Pinot Noir from increasingly inappropriate vessels, all in the spirit of the holiday season. Please don't sue me, Anne Rice Estate. Heart emoji. The event is documented quite poorly, mostly due to internet decay and also the fact that archiving scandalous stuff on the Wayback Machine was not as common of a practice as it is now. And so there's a lot of misconceptions that surround it. So to set the record straight, I conducted an in-depth interview with the Brad Queen, one of the 4 authors who got that sweet cease and desist letter from Anne Rice's lawyer. My initial idea was to publish the interview alongside this video, but after learning about some of the crazier shit that happened, from doxing to ruined businesses, I decided against putting the whole thing on the internet, first and foremost out of concern for the privacy and safety of those involved. For the same reasons, I'm going to be using pseudonyms and pen names and taking the steps to anonymize the fanfic writers at the heart of this. And I obviously ask the same of you. While some older documents used for this video do feature these people's names, let's be respectful of everybody's wishes to remain private and only use pseudonyms. TLDR, if you think that disrespecting people's boundaries and doxing them is like a normal thing to do, I will personally shit in front of your door. I verified the Brad Queen's story to the best of my abilities, you know, cross-referencing everything with independent sources, but some of it is just lost to time. So because I don't want to get myself or the Brad Queen in legal trouble with the Anne Rice estate, I am going to be using the word allegedly as like a sewed circle of sorts.
Vamoose, you little varmint.
How far back the history of fanfiction stretches largely depends on how you define the term. Said history, then, could include anything from Shakespeare to self-insert sold to One Direction stories, and more. In the current day understanding of the term, fanfiction is a fanish practice or fanish labor that entails writing, and most often sharing online, stories based on a pre-existing work of fiction or a real-life celebrity, typically on a non-commercial amateur basis and unauthorized by the copyright holder or subjects of the narrative. Like, you know, you don't typically notify Brian Fuller that you're gonna make Hannibal and Will Graham bang nasty style on the table, even though I think he would appreciate that. In this sense, fanfiction, like all fandom history, traces back to science fiction, and specifically to Star Trek. The first known fanfiction of various forms, from relationship-centric to one-shot ideas expanding on the fictional universe, was published in magazines for and by fans, or fanzines, like Spokenalia, which is most often cited as the first documented instance of fanfic. And I promise this is important, this is gonna come up later. But the point is that fanfiction at its dawn was inextricable from the IRL fanish practices, such as conventions or mailing lists. If you wanted to get some of that good NC21 stuff, you'd have to actually go and talk to people. Terrifying, I know.
Flash zines were sold under the table at these conventions. Literally, there was a table with zines on it. The slash stuff was never displayed for passers-by to see. And if you wanted to purchase them, you needed to either have a good relationship with the vendor selling them and or be able to have a good enough of a wink wink nudge nudge conversation about it to get them to trust you to show you, let alone sell it to you.
But then, the internet happened. And as it gradually became more accessible, things like Usenet, one of the predecessors of online forums, started making waves in fandom around the 80s.
It is here that we find a little group called Alt Books and Rice. ABAR, as we dubbed it, was a Usenet group that, to all appearances, had been created and abandoned. ABAR had nothing. There were a few people on it, but none of them had been around for its creation.
In the mid to late 90s, ABAR happened to be in the right place at the right time, With the increased popularity of the internet, the release of The Tale of the Body Thief, and especially the movie starring Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, more people started joining.
We were an extremely small puddle in a giant ocean of other Usenet groups. I couldn't tell you actual numbers if you held a gun to my head, but I'd be very surprised if we ever broke 50 regular members, including lurkers.
And this is where the story of the Brad Queen's involvement with Anne Rice's writing begins.
I was being as much of a devoted fan of Anne's as I could. When I joined ABAR, I then noticed a missing niche. Back then, FAQs were very important for Usenet groups. ABAR didn't have one, so I volunteered to do it. I put together the FAQ, updated it as needed, and posted it to ABAR on a regular basis. This made me not a mod because, again, I did not have any of the necessary admin privileges, but at least a notable person.
ABAR is also home to the first known online fanfiction based on Rice's work. In 1985, Mamnock the Spec was posted. Spec, specs for plural, is the term used at the time by Anne Rice fans, which is just kind of the same as fanfiction.
Because we did not know the word fanfiction. Seriously, not a single one of us did. S, the author of Memnock the Spec, had used the word speculation because it was what she speculated Memnock might be about. Okay, works for us. Specs it is.
Soon, other specs followed, and the third one ever posted, Sins of the Past, a sequel to Mamnock the Spec, was actually authored by the Brad Queen herself. Around that same time, The Black Rose, another Anne Rice fan and Spec author, created an archive where she would copy specs from ABAR to, with the author's permission, of course. That same year, in 1995, a storm started brewing. The tendency is to paint Anne Rice as somebody who has always hated fanfiction, but that's just not the case, at least publicly. Throughout the mid to late 90s, Anne Rice hosted something like a Q&A on another forum predecessor, CompuServe, a number of times. In 1995, during one of said Q&As, a fan asked if Rice had read or would read any of the specs written by her fans, to which she replied,
No, I haven't. I'm very possessive of my characters. I think it would hurt me terribly to read anything with some of my characters. I hope that you'll be inspired to write your own stories with your own characters.
In 1987, the author shared that she does not read any of the manuscripts, some of them fanfics, as we're safe to assume, sent in by her fans. And she said it was for multiple reasons. One of them being that she didn't want to be accused of stealing an idea or a character or a vision. Again, very level-headed, very mindful, very demure. Also quite a common practice among authors who are afraid of being sued. You know, there was the whole thing with Marion Zimmer Bradley, who didn't actually get sued, but the story's various iterations made so much fuss that you kind of remember it the way you remember like a scary urban legend. But Anne Rice's relationship with fanfiction soured quickly. On April 7th, the official Anne Rice website would post an important message from Anne Rice on fanfiction, which read,
I do not allow fanfiction. The characters are copyrighted. It upsets me terribly to even think about fanfiction with my characters. I advise my readers to write your own original stories with your own characters. It is absolutely essential that you respect my wishes.
And if this was not enough to set the fandom ablaze, just a few months later, on October 13th, 4 fanfiction writers get hit with cute little cease and desist orders from Anne Rice's lawyer, which forced all Vampire Chronicles fanfiction to go into hiding. And then, to top this all off, in May 2001, Anne Rice's lawyer sent a cease and desist to fanfiction.net, ordering that all Anne Rice fanfiction be deleted from the website.
It has come to our attention that your website, fanfiction.net, makes available over the internet numerous stories and other literary materials which contain the above listed characters and other material from the property. We must insist that fanfiction.net immediately refrain from making available over the internet or otherwise any work based on any element of the property. If we do not receive the foregoing reassurance from you by the close of business on Monday, May 21st, 2001, we will have no choice but to advise fanfiction.net's internet server of the matter and to ask such server to take appropriate action.
And fanfiction.net complied,
Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they got worse.
allegedly even removing the stories without notifying the authors first, which meant that many stories were lost forever. And so now people put copyright disclaimers into their fanfic, or so the story goes. And this is where you look at the progress bar and you see how much time there's left in the video, and you go, maybe that's actually not how the story goes, because you are just so smart. So in order to give the situation proper context, we're gonna have to go back to the wall. Oh god, how I've missed her. So the 4 authors that get a cease and desist were the Brad Queen, the Black Rose, Versailles Rose, and somebody I will be referring to as Mix X for, added mystery. You're already familiar with the Brad Queen and the Black Rose, the Spec archive keeper, but what you're not familiar with is the degree of their involvement with Anne Rice. These were not just BNFs, big name fans, but they were actually involved with Anne Rice and her team.
Anne's publisher reached out to us to work with us. Could we help hype upcoming books? Would I mind going through an advanced copy of an upcoming one and posting a review? It was just them asking if we minded helping out, and we were thrilled to do so.
The direct and enthusiastic communication with the Black Rose confirms that, at least as of 95, there seems to have been no bad blood. In an unrelated interview in 1997, she even claimed that Random House reached out to congratulate her on her archive. A year later, a competition that entailed writing stories in the style of Anne Rice, essentially a form of fanfiction, was hosted, and the Brad Queen won. You can say, sure, whatever. The contest was not hosted by Anne, she just didn't know. And that would be a fair point. So let's establish some more connections. First, the prize in said competition included a tour of Rice's properties led by her relatives, as well as an overnight stay in St. Elizabeth's orphanage. But perhaps more importantly, we have to mention talismanic tours. Come on. Talismanic Tours was a company that specialized in New Orleans Vampire Chronicle-centric tours, which was started around 1994-95 by enthusiastic Anne Rice fans, and involved both Rice's team and her official biographer, Catherine Ramsland. The latter would accompany tour guides and share insights. Initially, Rice's representatives had nothing against the idea. We wrote a letter to Miss Rice asking permission to do the tours. Weeks went by, and then Susie M., representing Miss Rice, phoned and said there was no problem, as long as we used a disclaimer that stated the tours were not authorized by the fan club or Anne Rice, which we happily did. We wanted to use the word Talamasca for the tours, but supposedly it's a word that is owned by David Geffen and the movie studios, thus we couldn't. The company even helped bring some people to the 1995 Memnock Ball. One of the tour guides, who is represented by this beautiful picture of Jamie from Eurotour in a wig, was coincidentally married to the Black Rose, the fanfic archive keeper. And more to that, the couple shared a house with the Brad Queen.
Oh my god, they were roommates.
So, when Anne's relatives came to our house to have business meetings with her, I was there too. It was a 4-room shotgun apartment. There was zero privacy. There was zero barrier between us and Anne's people, literally in each other's homes on multiple occasions.
The Brad Queen additionally claims that notoriety as an Anne Rice fan might have even helped her land a job.
If I remember correctly, an informal conversation between the guy in charge of hiring for this and someone at Anne's publishing company gave the guy the names of me and some of my friends from ABAR as possible candidates. We all then had individual phone interviews, and I was the one who got the job.
So, all parties involved seem to have been on good terms and even in a somewhat symbiotic relationship.
Some people made art, which the internet was now advanced enough to share pictures on. Some did songs. Some made specialized perfumes. Some made Lestat concert tour bumper stickers. Some made t-shirts. And at this point, Anne loved us. Yes, please, do your t-shirts and pictures and tours.
But what changed between 1995 and the year 2000? Why were there suddenly cease and desist orders involved? Well, there are multiple reasons that get brought up in relation to the story. I'm going to focus on two specifically. Reason number one, Anne Rice got some of the rights to the monetization of her books back, specifically merchandising and marketing rights. This happened in 1986, and that same year, Keith & Kin LLC was registered with Anne Rice as a registered officer and her sister, Nancy Rice Diamond, as the agent. And a few months later, Anne Rice's very own New Orleans Tours LLC was born. The tours, which were charging well above market prices, were the first to officially come from Anne Rice and her family. And New Orleans is so small. In fact, it's too small for multiple Rice-centric tour companies. I taught school until February 1986 and left my teaching position to do the tours full-time. Then, days later, we received a notice from an attorney that was rather cold, ordering us to cease immediately or legal action would be taken. After all the love I had for Anne and all the fans I got to join the club, I felt I was kicked in the teeth for being a fan. I am disappointed that I didn't get a phone call that said, "We're going to do this now. Do you mind stopping?" I am disappointed that an attorney contacted me, so I had to spend money I didn't have to respond. This not only led to a fandom-wide and specifically New Orleans-wide explosion and disappointment for many diehard fans, but also created a precedent of Anne Rice's team, allegedly, using fanish activities as free market research, only to later undercut them by serving them a cease and desist and pumping those profits up. Now, you might think, sure, even if those alleged things are true, you don't sell fanfiction, silly. It's non-commercial. And here's where we come back to the zines. I told you that was important.
It did not come from Anne's publisher, but her personal lawyer. The one thing that had changed, the one thing that the lawyer specifically pointed to as something to especially cease and desist immediately, was that we were going to try and make a zine.
Fanzines as a practice are also typically non-commercial or non-profit, bringing in just enough to cover operating costs.
There was a small printing business near our place in... So the Black Rose and I floated the idea of, hey, what if we made a Vampcron fanfic zine? Not for profit, obviously. We got as far as putting up an announcement saying we were thinking about it to find out who was interested. And it was like 48 hours tops after that the C&D came in going, "Oh no, you will not!" Now, Christine made it clear fanfic in general wasn't cool, but she made sure to point to the zine thing.
And I should add, as a disclaimer, that Anne Rice or her relatives, to the best of my knowledge, did not start an official fanzine or any zine for that matter. So this is nothing more than guesses about something that happened a quarter of a century ago and was never properly documented. And more to it, that this reason doesn't explain why Rice's lawyer reached out to fanfiction.net or why people who weren't involved with the zine got served. Versailles Rose, by the way, was not involved with the zine, but as the Brat Queen recalls, had a small business that was somewhat involved with the 1994 Interview with the Vampire movie.
What Versailles Rose got was not just a C&D, but a direct threat on her business. For me, TBR, and it was, hey, you will get in trouble. But for VR, who was older, she had her small business, so she actually had something substantial to lose. And it was frankly supremely shitty for that to be something that was put into the crosshairs. This is part of why she doesn't want to talk about it to this day.
So maybe, allegedly, there was some commercial interest involved. But what about Mix X? The person who was just writing fanfiction. Reason 2. Anne Rice, as she herself admitted on multiple occasions, is very possessive of her characters. That has always been the case, but from 1996 onwards, she allegedly did not have to go through her publisher and had the opportunity to shut down fanfic that she felt was playing around with the dolls that she saw as solely hers. The Black Rose and the Brat Queen were trying to do the zine thing. Versailles Rose had her small business, and Mix X was seemingly not at all related to the whole thing, but they were all spec writers. Okay, So maybe, allegedly, it was a combination of rather unfortunate choices and attitudes. But did Anne Rice have any leg to stand on? Like, is fanfiction actually infringing on copyright? Look at my fucking lawyer, dog. I'm gonna get a cease and desist from Anne Rice. Copyright law, as kind of like all law does, differs from country to country. Fuck. And though I'm going to focus on the US, since that's where the story takes place, similar concepts kind of exist all around the world. Fan fiction is still largely a gray area with no certain precedent, which would allow for a blanket judgment, but people typically defer to the fair use clause. First name fair, last name use is murky in itself and is evaluated on a case-by-case basis based on a rather free interpretation of the four following criteria. First, how and what for did you use the original work? Second, the nature of the original work. Third, the amount of original work you used. And fourth, whether your thing impacts the market value of the original work. The example that gets brought up most often to justify the persecution of fanfiction is Salinger v. Colting. The case dealt with the novel entitled 60 Years Later, Coming Through the Rye, which follows an aged-up Holden Caulfield. The court ultimately decided that the book did not fit the definition of fair use, but a similar case was actually cleared. Santras Bank v. Hood and Muffin Company is about The Wind Done Gone, which retells the events of Gone with the Wind from the perspective of an enslaved mixed-race woman. The Wind Done Gone was not found to be infringing on copyright because it was highly transformative and would have little effect on the market for Gone with the Wind or any of its licensed derivative works. These two cases, while providing a basis for speculation on the legality of fanfiction, also differ from fanfiction in a pretty significant way. Say it with me now. They operate on a commercial basis. Fanfiction typically doesn't. I mean, like, yeah, sure, there are many cases of fanfic authors filing the serial numbers off and publishing their work as original fiction. You know, most notably 50 Shades, After, The Love Hypothesis, Heated Rivalry, and all of that. And also, seeking out fanfiction writers is not an uncommon practice in publishing. There's been many a heated debate about the legitimacy of such practice and about monetizing fanfic in general. And to that I say, Rachel Reed, get your back, girl. Anne Rice herself, by the way, was seemingly not against the practice when she was being shady towards 50 Shades in 2012.
I don't make judgments. I prefer to ignore it. But if 50 Shades of Grey can grow out of that, well, there are no rules. Books can come out in any variety of ways.
But again, fan fiction is most often a strictly non-commercial practice. And it has been like that since its inception. People are making characters bone nasty style simply for the love of the game. It's somewhat of a folk communal practice, so trying to evaluate it from a commercial perspective not only makes very little sense, but frankly demonstrates a misunderstanding of fanish culture that, you know, is prevalent in the mainstream. To quote Henry Jenkins, one of the most influential academic in fan studies,
fan culture conforms to all the traits cultural theorist John Fiske has identified as a characteristic of traditional folk culture. Fan culture, like traditional folk culture, constructs a group identity, articulates the community's ideals, and defines its relationship to the outside world. Fan culture, like traditional folk culture, is transmitted informally and does not define a sharp boundary between artists and audiences. Fan culture, like folk culture, exists independently of formal social, cultural, and political institutions.
Rebecca Tushnet, taking these ideas into consideration, argued that fanfic deserved to be protected from overreaching enforcements of copyright law way back in 1997. In their article advocating for fanfic protection, they write, "Fandom demonstrates that unlimited economic incentives to create in the form of expansive intellectual property protection are unnecessary to spur productivity and may even inhibit it. Market-oriented theories of copyright disregard the inherent power of storytelling." But Anne Rice's lawyers were very much aware of that. To quote their letter to fanfiction.net yet again,
"Even when done on a nonprofit and/or amateur basis, such use of such characters and material without Miss Rice's permission constitutes copyright infringement."
And no!
It's false. No way. Not this time. Not this time. No, not this time. We made it up. We made this one up. It's a made-up tale. It's a total fabrication.
So, you know, while most fanfiction would fall under fair use when properly evaluated, the year 2000 was still the Wild West, with no organizations willing or having the resources to fight for authors. I mean, some of the same scare tactics by way of abusing copyright law are still widely used today. The gray zone of fair use allows those with more money and power to use the copyright law to their advantage. If you don't have a lawyer or extensive knowledge of legal procedures surrounding copyright to back you up when you're served a cease and desist, then you're kinda toast. Sorry. As a post with some brilliant legal analysis from the year 2000 puts it, Anne Rice does not want you writing fanfiction, and she has the money to make you stop. Do you really want to try this? Well, where does all this leave us? Having deleted everything about the zine from the website, the Brad Queen and the Black Rose pretended to be clueless in response to Anne Rice's lawyer.
Then we tried going back to Christine, like, don't know what you're talking about. No infringement going on with that clearly not at all related to Anne or anything page. Also, totally not us. We put that up for a friend of ours. At which point, Christine wrote back with another email in which she called me out not only by my full government name, but also with more personal details to say that no, for real, I was going to be on the hook if there was zero compliance with what they were telling me to do.
And so they did. Despite how unpopular these actions were in the fandom, nobody wanted to be the next person to get into legal trouble with lawyered up big name author Anne Rice. And so Vampire Chronicles Specs went even more underground. As the archive, the one the Black Rose was in charge of, would share shortly after, she was always credited, and she, her employees, and Random House, her publisher, were well aware of it and maintained a don't ask, don't tell policy. Now, apparently, that suddenly isn't enough. There's nothing here. No specs, no stories, no nothing. Now, maybe, hypothetically, if you had the password and the handshake, you could get into the private forum where private citizens could still share private words with each other without being told by authors with too much money to waste that their First Amendment is being taken away and freedom of speech no longer exists. But that's just hypothetical. The Brad Queen clarified in our interview that these secret pages could be accessed
if you knew the right thing to click in a huge paragraph where nothing in it looked like a link, but secretly something was.
The SpecWriter Massacre left many disappointed by how Rice treated her fans, and some were quick to point out the perceived hypocrisy in writing and selling books based on the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale and then going against fanfiction. And then there was the fanfiction.net purge. People on fanfiction.net did not have the time to safely file away their fics on their computers, and so people did end up losing what they wrote. There's a widely shared misconception that this is what led fanfic authors to include copyright disclaimers into their works. You know, the classic, I don't own these characters, so-and-so does, this is a fan work created on a non-profit basis. The wording varies, of course, but that's kind of generally what they say. And that idea is simply false. Anne Rice was not the first author who tried to remove fanfic from the net, nor would she be the last one. Even in the aforementioned article by Tushnet, which, reminder, came out in 1997, there's a whole section dedicated to copyright disclaimers. So by 1997, they were already being used frequently enough to warrant discussion in a paper dissecting fanfiction and copyright. The SpecWriter Massacre had a strong impact on the Anne Rice fandom, and especially on those affected directly. But in the grand scheme of things, and I cannot emphasize this enough, it was one of the numerous instances of copyright holders unfairly attacking fandom. Okay, one thing I feel I need to clarify is that this case was unique in a very specific way, and is that Anne Rice, like the actual individual Anne Rice and not just the copyright holder, like for example Warner Brothers, was at the head of all this and taking actual steps as like an individual to persecute fanfiction, because in previous similar cases the anti-fandom impulse was coming from the big bad, the media corporations that didn't really understand, you know, what fandom is or how it works. Whereas here, it was a very specific individual author. Actually, I'm not done. Let me add more to this.
I'm not done talking yet. You will speak when I'm done.
Oh, honey.
Another distinguishing characteristic of the whole thing was that Anne Rice specifically targeted fanfiction. Because again, Similar cases usually went after domain names, after using logos, after using type fonts, and sometimes fanfiction would kind of get roped in, but it wasn't like the main, problem that copyright holders were taking with fan activity on the internet. Here, however, Anne Rice was very specifically saying fanfiction is what should not be allowed. Fanfiction.net still doesn't have a working category for Anne Rice fics, by the way. So, the long-term effects of the event are best evaluated in the way that it contributed to certain trends and the general way we perceive fanfic and fandom.
It reinforced the need to not step on creators' toes, for sure. Anne's actions took the idea of this might happen to this did happen. The specifics may have gotten fuzzy over the years, but I feel like you can't argue it had an impact.
In 2007, after commercially owned and run FanLib was announced, the lack of resources for and by fans, specifically platforms that are safe for both readers and writers of fanfiction, and that are willing to put in the time and work to protect them, hit a boiling point. And so the Organization for Transformative Works and its archive known as AO3 were created. Everybody say thank you, Organization for Transformative Works. The continued success of these platforms, as I would argue, further proves the non-commercial, communal, and folkish nature of fan labor and fan fiction. When I asked how the SpecWriter Massacre influenced the Brat Queen, this is what she had to say.
It very much gives me appreciation for things like AO3 and the Organization for Transformative Works, which fight to protect fanfic and our right to create it.
And what about Anne Rice? Well, the next time she mentioned fanfiction was in 2012.
I got upset about 20 years ago because I thought it would block me. However, it's been easy to avoid reading any. So live and let live. If I were a younger writer, I'd want to own my own ideas. But maybe fanfiction is a transitional phase. Whatever gets you there, gets you there.
Which is not an apology, but it's better than nothing, I guess. This holiday story does have a happy ending after all. What's the moral? I don't know, maybe take out your friend who writes fanfiction for dinner. And maybe don't threaten your fans with legal action because they made your characters